class. This is the last class of this series. So we had an excellent lesson from Dr. Cloud, and he's still getting accolades from people, as he should. But his mic is on, so whenever he wants to say something, he can, even if he's in mid-stride. That's the hip way to do it, is talk as you're coming up on the stage. At least that's what I've heard from some folks. But today will be the last lesson in the Heroes of Faith as we switch terms, semesters, whatever you want to call it. You're sitting on your wire, you know what I'm saying? There you go. It'll pull it right out of your ear if you're not careful. So we're going to cover Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. And you want to kick it off? Are you recovered enough to do so?
Oh, I'll rest a minute from
rest
the
a minute?
sermon while I'll let you kick it off.
All right, so we're going to get through Martha, Mary, and Lazarus this morning just because we want to go into our new topic for July, August, and September that will start next week. But I think a lot of this will be familiar to a lot of you, but it'll still be beneficial, or we wouldn't have wasted your time with it. We start off with Mary and Martha, and I know Dr. Cloud will have some thoughts on this probably here in a minute, that Mary, or Maria, is a very common name. We don't talk about it much, but it's almost like Jesus is a common name too in the first century. And so sometimes it gets a little difficult sometimes to know which Mary we're talking about, but here Scripture gives us Mary and Martha, so you know that they're sisters and you know which Mary they're talking about. And in Luke 10:38 through 42, it says, as they traveled along, Jesus entered a village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home, and she had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to his message. What's significant about that is we try to keep bringing things from a different angle. Is you might read it quickly, like I did for who knows how many years, from childhood up through several decades of adulthood, and just go, okay, that's nice. She must have liked sitting on the floor. Actually, she's sitting in the position that the rabbis reserved for students, and she's a female, and so that's something that is unusual at that time. So we shouldn't read past that real quickly and just say, well, she happened to choose to sit near his feet. No, the position she's sitting in, listening to his message, his teaching, is the position that the rabbi's students would sit in for learning.
Yeah, we got to bring some Greek and Hebrew in, of course. The name in Hebrew is Miriam. Miriam. That went into Greek and Latin as Maria, and on into English as Mary. And when the excitement dies down over that, I'll continue. So anyway.
Go ahead.
So anyway, here, this is an important part of the story. The main story we're working our way to, of course, is when Lazarus gets raised. But apparently, whenever Jesus came by, Martha was left to do the hard work, and Mary was listening to Jesus. And so that's why you have Martha complaining a little bit here. Do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her to help me. That's just so natural, with family, sisters, and all that. But Jesus makes it very clear. Is that what we have it on the next slide?
Yeah, that Mary has chosen the better option.
Right, yeah. You don't understand what you're saying. This is an opportunity in a lifetime to hear Jesus speak, and so it was just really, really important. So anyway.
Yeah, and we hear that echoed later, that idea of he won't be with them forever. I mean, he will spiritually, but you know what I'm saying. He won't be physically with them forever. So worrying about the house, worrying about the meal, worrying about hospitality is good, but putting that ahead of the fact that time with Jesus is limited is what I think he's actually saying Mary chose the better option, because that time with Jesus at his feet can't be taken away from her. She'll have that for the rest of her life.
Right, correct.
So there's a man named Lazarus.
Right, a brother of these two named Lazarus. Some people think that this Lazarus is the same one in the parable.
Some people do.
Stan is one of those people, and he may be right about that, about the situation. But Anyway, Lazarus, we did put it on the screen, actually comes from the Hebrew Eliezer, which looks strange. Again, the language thing, names from Old Testament to New Testament. We spend a lot of time in here talking about that, but it helps you understand much better what's going on if you have a little bit of feel, like Miriam to Maria to Mary, a little bit better feel for it. Anyway, go ahead and pick up right there.
I actually read something on that, and I can't remember it all, on how it became Lazarus. It's actually Lazar, and that was the translated name, and then the U.S. gets put on because of Greek.
Yeah, Greek. Then probably the U.S. might even be and then Latin probably changed it again. I'd have to look at the Greek text. That'd be an interesting thing.
Oh, interesting. So Lazarus falls ill. We don't really know exactly of what, but it's grave, right? We've entitled these slides "The Death of Lazarus" because that ultimately is what happens. As like I said, most of us in here and online probably know that. But it's not just he's fallen sick, and wouldn't it be great if Jesus would come and visit him while he's ill? They already know that if Jesus doesn't come, this is going to be terminal.
Right. Yeah. It's again, you get scared when people get sick. This is not a natural thing to do, and apparently this is a very, very tightly knit family. You'll see in a minute. They live just couple of miles, 2 to 3 miles from Jerusalem in a town called Bethany. We have a map for you right there. But was some point.
Well,
yes.
I think you saying that it's a very, very serious matter, and when people get sick, people take it seriously, and yet here it looks like Jesus does the opposite. He just makes this statement: Lazarus' sickness will not end in death, and does not get in a haste, does not get in a hurry to go see him.
Right. Again, something we didn't put in, we've mentioned before, and we'll do when we do our word studies beginning next week. I'm sure we're going to discuss these words, but when you're reading John's text, the girl sent a message. He whom you love, and that Greek word is phileo. There, that's also the word for kiss and being fond of. And then as the text goes along, John changed it. He changed to the other word. He said, Jesus loved agapao. The word agape is a cognate to that. And the two words can be synonymous in a few passages, no doubt about it. A lot of words are, but phileo also can mean to be fond of, to kiss. And the Greek word kataphileo is used in 2 places. Luke 15, when Jesus says the Father right across the fields and to greet the lost son coming back, and the Father is, of course, God. And the parable I call the parable of the waiting father. People call it the parable of the prodigal son, the parable of the lost son, but I call it the parable of the waiting father. Emphasis on God's grace and God's love. And it says the Father kissed him and kissed him and kissed him, rather than just kissed him. He kissed him much. And some English versions have a little footnote saying that. And so anyway, so we'll probably dwell on that word quite a bit in the future.
So here what's interesting is Jesus just frankly says, Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. It happened for the glory of God, that the Son of God will receive glory from this. And so although Jesus loved Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, he stayed where he was for the next 2 days. And finally he said to his disciples, hey, let's go back to Judea. And they're thinking, why in the world would you go to Judea? Only a few days ago, people in Judea were trying to stone you. So they're concerned for Jesus' safety, while Mary and Martha are concerned about Lazarus, and Jesus seems to be the only one in the middle that's not really concerned about either his safety or Lazarus's.
Right, correct.
And then he says to them, Jesus does, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but now I will go and wake him up. Now that's interesting, because fallen asleep, that appears in our English translations a lot, is, I guess it's fair to say it's a euphemism for dying, right? And so a lot of times people say that they're completely interchangeable or synonymous like you were just doing with phileo and agapago, but that's not necessarily true, right? Sometimes it means asleep.
That's right.
Other times in this case, and in the case where Jairus' daughter was raised,
Right.
they were dead.
Right. Jonah falls asleep downstairs during the storm,
Not dead.
not dead. And many times Scripture says, oh, so-and-so died and slept with his fathers. That simply means that it just became an idiom.
Yeah.
So Jesus makes a play on that. Jesus frequently makes a play on words when he's talking to Nicodemus. The word for wind, pneuma, which you get pneumonia, and spirit are the same word in Greek. So Jesus is trying to explain this to Nicodemus, and he basically says, the wind blows, and you can't see the wind, but it's still, you see the leaves move. So he's saying the Spirit's like that. You can't see the Spirit, but you can see the effects of the Spirit.
Well, interestingly here, they're not dull to this concept you've just mentioned, because they say, well, Lord, if he's sleeping, he will soon get better.
Right.
So they call him on it, and then he says they thought Jesus meant Lazarus was simply sleeping, but Jesus meant Lazarus had died.
Right.
And so then he just comes out and says, so he plainly tells them, I love that, like, okay, all right, guys, here it is. Lazarus is dead. And for your sakes, I'm glad I wasn't there, for now you will really believe. Come, let's go see him. So for their sakes, he's glad that whatever Lazarus goes through there, which if you want to talk about that, that's why I think it is the same Lazarus, but whatever Lazarus goes through there to Jesus is a benefit to the apostles, the disciples, and all those who will see and believe in him.
Yeah, if Jesus had been there, it would have been hard for him not to do something.
Right.
With everybody watching, So he said, I'm glad I wasn't there because you're going to see something greater.
Greater. All right, so what about that? Anybody else do anything like that?
What are you referring to? Did you get rid of it?
You stuck Thomas in here as another example of somebody who needed to see things in order to believe.
Gotcha.
It's a benefit for them that Lazarus died so they can see and believe because of what Jesus does.
Right.
They're not the only ones. Well, I mean, Thomas is there, but the one we normally think of is poor Thomas. He's just, I wouldn't want to be doubting Thomas,
Yes.
except we kind of all are doubting Thomas.
Yeah, the first thing you hear was Thomas's name, doubting Thomas, because when Jesus was resurrected, I won't believe. I don't believe it. I don't believe you. And then Jesus had to come, and so I had a hard time finding this. I wanted a shot with the word Thomas on there, and the only one I could find was this one right here. Thomos is the Greek name. It's Thomos, and that you can recognize some of the letters. The second letter, omega there, that's just a big O. The last letter looks like a C. It's really not a C. It's a Greek S used in capital letters sometimes. And you may remember, those of you who are older, the Russian uniforms for the Olympics. CCCP, does anyone remember that? That's SSSR. The Russian borrowed a lot of their alphabet from the Greek, and therefore they borrowed that letter there that's really an S. And so then on the left-hand side, I have no idea why they did that. They started spelling apostolos, but they stopped. Maybe it was behind. Oh, maybe it's behind him. I didn't think about that. Maybe if he moved out of the way, you could see that on the left, the rest of the word apostle. But anyway, it's supposed to say the Apostle Thomas.
Now, you didn't know I was going to do this,
Okay.
but you also have the text up here, Thomas, nicknamed the twin. Some texts, I think, call him Didymus, right?
Right.
It's a very fascinating idea that if he is a twin, who is he a twin of? And would it be possible that the reason Judas had to kiss Jesus for the guards to know which one he was is because Thomas looked a lot like Jesus?
Never thought about that.
Otherwise, why would he bother to tell us that he is nicknamed the twin?
Yeah, that's right.
Because we don't know, he doesn't have a twin brother, so he's got to look like somebody in the group for him to get that nickname. So just interesting. You don't have, not dogmatically, but that would sure explain why, even if you had a wanted poster that said we're looking for this guy, Jesus of Nazareth, if there's two people that kind of look like that guy, then Judas would say, well, I'll kiss the one you're supposed to arrest. So.
Yeah, you may have seen the movie The Man in the Iron Mask.
Yes.
Of course, the same person plays
both characters, and then they swap. Yeah. Yeah. That was a good movie.
Yeah. Okay.
So then he says the strangest thing, though. All of that about Thomas, because Thomas says, well, let's go too. Let's go with him to Judea, and let's just die with Jesus. That's a bold statement to just also
that doesn't sound like a doubting Thomas, does it?
No, it doesn't.
No, that surprises people sometimes when they see that statement.
And so there's the stained glass version of what we normally think of Thomas, having to touch the spear wound in his side and his hands and see that it's actually him. But I think sometimes we don't really allow ourselves to be real authentic with the idea of how would we feel right now if someone came right through those back doors and walked down here and claimed that they'd seen somebody that we know we'd buried 3 days ago. We're probably going to tell them they're crazy, and we're not going to believe it. So if we don't believe it now, and we have the truth of the story, it'd be even harder to believe when it never happened before.
Correct. Oh, yes.
So I don't think we do justice sometimes to Thomas because we're quick to make it sound like, well, he should have known. He should have known that the most improbable news in all of life, he should have just gone, sure, okay, yeah, I believe that. Instead, he was probably very rational with his preposterous. There's no way in the world that he could be alive.
Just think about James and Jude. If Jude is the brother of James, and they're writers who would think they're half-brothers of Jesus, they didn't believe.
Right.
All through the Gospels, they don't believe. They don't believe until Christ is resurrected, and they finally come around. You see them in Acts chapter 1, there they are. And then James becomes very, very influential in the church.
So we'll stick a pin in that and come back to it in a minute because there's going to be somebody that gets resurrected before Jesus, which is going to be Lazarus.
Right.
So here's your map. When Jesus arrived at Bethany, he was told that Lazarus had already been in his grave for 4 days. So apparently he's sleeping very heavily.
Right.
Karen laughed. I got one laugh. That's good.
I just thought it'd be good to have some maps showing you the proximity of Bethany and Jerusalem. It was just, one version actually says it was a stone's throw. Something like it was a stone's throw. And
maybe by you and David with the baseball abilities, but not most people.
Okay.
This is probably what would have happened if it was modern times. Instead of him being dead for 4 days and put in the tomb, Jesus would show up and somebody would say, well, we had him cremated yesterday because you didn't come. Now, luckily for the Bible story and what we know is true, they were not that way. They weren't doing cremation, and even though he had died, they didn't do anything unexpected to Jesus, is the point.
Yeah, when I went searching, what we do is we go to the internet and we search for, you just simply put in the person, and they hit images or pictures, and they'll bring up all these pictures. And that was the very first one that came up. And I said, so I put it in there just to show Stan.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know, I was afraid someone might take offense at it. So then when we saw it, we talked about it. I said, well, we can probably
explain it,
do it in a tactful way and not be sacrilegious.
Yeah, it would have concerned me if we'd started off with this or just tried to say it to be funny. But that's how much times have actually changed. Jesus knew that he was going to Jesus knew he was going to let Lazarus die so that he could be glorified, so that people would believe. And he also knew this wouldn't happen. Nobody would do anything before he got there that would prevent, of course, if he'd been cremated, he could have called him out of the dust and he would have come back from that. That would have been maybe even more impressive. But the point is, there was nothing that was going to trip up Jesus' plan, is what I was trying to get at.
Yes.
Where today, we jump in and everything has to be done, immediately. And so it could have been a little bit more problematic for him.
I've had, maybe a dozen people in my life talk to me about this. I'm not sure if we should cremate my husband or not. And we're actually being concerned about being able to be raised from the dead, So anyway, I do my best to explain. It's not a problem.
Not a problem. So here's another topology map that shows you the elevation. You may be a stone's throw away, but you'd have to throw it up high and then it arch over, right?
That's correct. Of course, Stan is going to be co-hosting the trip to Israel, and our brochures did come because we can send it to you electronically, but there are some brochures up here about the trip. But anyway, one thing is kind of a surprise to you when you do go to Israel. Probably one of the things I learned most, because I knew Israel was small. Didn't really quite know how small. I mean, I knew the mileage and all that, but it still didn't really realize how small it was. But I learned more about the topography, the elevations than I knew before. Here you're in Jerusalem. I remember the very first time that we were in Jerusalem, we were over on the east side of town, and there was a hospital there. And so we pulled in the parking lot, and I didn't know why the bus driver was doing that. And then my guide, Ami Weiss, said he wanted to show us something. So we got out and stood there, and you could see the Dead Sea. And it's 13 miles from where we were standing, 13 miles. But it's 3,500 feet down from where you are, or more. It's down. And so when you go down, one of the things I haven't worked out on your trip yet was we want to get you on the road to Jericho, and go the old road. Yeah. Some of the trips we couldn't do that the way we're coming, but as you're going down, there is a St. George's Church. There's a canyon there, and there's a stream running all the way from Jerusalem down to Jericho. And there's a place to stop at St. George's. It's got a blue. It's across the valley from you, and it takes 45 minutes to walk up there and go. So we don't usually go. And it has a ladder. You have to go in by a ladder. When you get inside of St. George's, there's a stack of skulls of all the monks that have been there, and this stack of skulls. But anyway, as you stand there, you can look and see the steeples in Jerusalem, and you can see the city of Jericho at the same time.
Wow. But
the road going down, just is the only room for the bus. It's kind of scary. And so I remember one of the times we were going down, and when you go downhill, it really is a little scary. And the bus would swing out over kind of like over the canyon. It looked like you're going to fall off. And I remember Ami said to us one time, he said, don't be afraid, and just do the same thing. The driver's name was David. He said, don't be afraid, do the same thing that David does when these curves. He closes his eyes. Little humor there,
Well, to the brochure, we do have some printed, and if you're online or even if you're in here, we also have them online at hendersonville.org/Israel. And the deposit date is August the 1st of $450, and you can send that directly in to the address and information that's on either the electronic version or the one up here. So we're looking forward to going over there in December and seeing some of this stuff in person. So, interestingly enough, when Jesus comes to town, Martha got word that he was coming, and she runs out to meet him, but Mary decides to stay back. So Mary's probably a little bit more upset, sorrowful about Lazarus, and doesn't really know, probably, I'm guessing, how to interact with Jesus at that moment. So Martha goes out and greets him, but she's not around.
Yeah, Martha, we don't really know this for sure. Martha may have been the older sister.
Yeah. And
a lot of times when they list the names, they don't always list by age. Sometimes they do it by prominence, somebody very prominent. But she seems to be the one that takes the ball always and goes with it.
Yes, even from the kitchen. So Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask. I should have bolded that too. I'm going to explain why I bolded this. Jesus told her, your brother will rise again. Now check this out. This is God. This is the Lord. This is the creator of the universe? And Martha says, yes, he will rise when everyone else rises on the last day. And I told Dr. Cloud, I said, I don't know that I've ever noticed this kind of definitive statement to Jesus of, oh, I understand, and then almost like a box that's made for what he has to know. So there's two there. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask. So she tells him that. And then he will rise again when everyone else rises at the last day. Not just stopping maybe and thinking or being for a moment without words and just wondering what he means by your brother will rise again. Or just ask that. What do you mean, Lord? Instead of, oh, you must just mean this. I know that all you can possibly mean is this. And so we talked about that for a little bit. It comes back up here in a second too. Jesus told her, I'm the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live even after dying. And everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this, Martha? And then she says, yes. She told him, I always have believed you're the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who's come into the world from God. Then she returned to Mary. She called Mary aside from the mourners and told her, the teacher is here and wants to see you. So Mary immediately went to Jesus. Jesus had stayed outside the village at the place where Martha met him, and when the people who were at the house consoling Mary saw her leave so hastily, they assumed she was going to Lazarus' grave to weep, so they followed her there. Now watch what happens. Martha has a box answer to God about what he can and can't do, and then Mary has one. When Mary arrived and saw Jesus, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. So what we were discussing is, it's like we believe in you. We know you're the Messiah. We've made all these pronouncements of who you are and what we believe, right? But death is somehow final. Like because you weren't here and he has died, there's nothing that can be done. If you had been here before he died, you could have done something about it. But now you can't do anything about it because he's dead.
Yeah, they must not have seen some of the things he had done before.
Correct.
With children or whatever. The name of this construction, again, I know I throw a lot of Greek at you, but the name of this construction is very interesting. It's called contrary to fact. When you see it in the Greek grammar, it'll say, now here's how you make a contrary to fact statement. And so the fact is you weren't here, and by the way, we called you.
Right.
Trying to get you here, and you were not here. But now that you're, as you said, now that you're here, it won't matter.
Exactly. That's what they're saying.
Yeah.
And don't you know that people who believe in me will live again? Oh, yeah, on the last day, yeah, sure, but you can't do anything about it now. Like they don't get it. They don't really know who he is, or they wouldn't have said those things.
Yeah, you get emotionally tied up because
Sure.
they're just emotionally upset about this, and once he's died, they think maybe they'll see him at the resurrection in heaven, but he's gone. There's nothing nothing you can do about it, Jesus. You're here. You're nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, and I think this is why I think you put Thomas in. This is another example of the same type of faith yet questioning, or faith yet just absurdity that something can be different than we think,
Right.
which, connects a lot of dots. It connects Jesus saying if you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could tell that mountain to move over there. And since I've never seen anybody move a mountain, nobody has faith the size of a mustard seed is the way to do that logic. And it shows up all time and time again, and unfortunately it would show up with us too.
Right.
When Jesus saw her weeping and saw the other people wailing with her, he was intensely moved, and he was deeply troubled. Where have you put him? He asked. And we come to
Jesus wept.
Jesus wept, the shortest English verse
Right.
of the Bible.
You frequently will see it'll say shortest verse in the Bible. It's the shortest verse in the English Bible. It's not the shortest verse in the Greek Bible, which is kind of interesting, but apparently not too interesting to you. But anyway, kind of interesting.
Some people look interested.
Yeah, it's a big, long Greek word is one of the reasons.
So they told him, Lord, come and see. And then Jesus wept. And again, we've said this before, but even when we were putting the lesson together, we were not only thinking about it not being the shortest verse in the Bible, depending on which language you're in, but also the fact that the chapters and verses were added. And so nobody in early time would have been nitpicky about whether or not a verse was 2 words or a single word or whatever, because they didn't look at it that way. It was the story, the account of what they were reading.
Yeah, people do not realize the original text have no verses, no chapters. You got the scroll of Isaiah. It just goes all the way. And so the verse divisions were actually made partly by the Geneva Bible, partly by a man named Robert Stephanus. He was his relatives, because some of the divisions he made in the chapter, the divisions are not holy at all. But anyway, because of some of the decisions he made, the joke was that he made the divisions on a donkey ride from someplace to, I don't remember what the whole story was, but anyway, they made a joke about why he made a division there. But again, there were no chapters and verse divisions in the original autographs. The original text is called the autograph. All right?
So the people who were standing nearby said, "See how much he loved him," meaning see how much Jesus loved Lazarus. But some said, "This man healed a blind man." So here's somebody who knows, at least by word of mouth, some of the things he's been doing. They said, "This man healed a blind man. Couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying?"
Yeah. And again, they may have seen him do things like heal a blind man, but this is another step.
Yeah. You almost wonder if, we call Jesus the great physician, and you might think that someone who has blindness or lameness or something else, because they're not dead, they can be healed. But it wouldn't matter if you, to them, gave someone sight after they're dead. They can't see anything, or they can't walk after they're dead. So death, again, is the finality of all this. So Jesus was still troubled as he arrived at the tomb, a cave with a stone rolled across its entrance. "Roll the stone aside," Jesus told them, which Martha specifically is not very happy about that, because she's concerned about what her brother is going to smell like, look like, that type of thing. Right?
Yeah, when you go to Israel, we'll make sure that your guide, we haven't got the guide worked out yet, will show you some tombs with stones next to them. When you go to the garden tomb, that stone that you go and see in the garden tomb was brought there. When they dug down there, there looks like there's a pathway for the stone to go in, but they brought that stone in. But we always try to stop at a couple of places where on the road, there's one really close to Mount Carmel. We're coming out of Mount Carmel that we usually stop at on the way to Megiddo. And anyway, you got the stone, and you got a stone. That stone is supposed to be actually for that tomb.
But Martha, the dead man's sister, protested, "Lord, he has been dead for 4 days. The smell will be terrible." And Jesus responded, "Didn't I tell you that you would see God's glory if you believe?" So they rolled the stone aside. Now, this is the kind of stuff, that's one slide too early. In a minute, we'll have some other ideas about that. But the 4 days is stressed now 3 times. 4 days is very important. Why?
I'm not sure what to make sure he's dead?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they had a belief in the first century that if you were dead 3 or more days, 3 days, I think, was actually the belief. So 4 would just made it extra dead. If you've been dead 3, you're dead. But if you've been dead 4, you're really dead. Like, there's no way you're coming back, right?
Right.
It wasn't a unconscious. It wasn't a resuscitate. It wasn't something like that. I mean, there is no way in the world this person's not dead. Hence, that's why they would start to smell, because they've already started to decompose.
Right. Yeah, that's correct. That is correct.
Then Jesus looked up to heaven and said, "Father, thank you for hearing me." And I love this statement. You always hear me, but I said it out loud for the sake of all those people standing here. Have you ever thought about that? That means that if you ever pray and you think, "Well, I wonder if he hears me if I don't pray out loud," he does, because he heard Jesus when he prayed, and he said specifically, "I said it out loud on purpose for the other people to hear, so that they will believe that you sent me." Then Jesus shouted, "Lazarus, come out." And I put that in bold, and I said, "Why?" And I think you were okay with this, but I asked you last night, if he hadn't said Lazarus and he'd just shouted, "Come out," every dead person in the entire tomb would have come out, right? That would have been problematic. It'd be, oh, sorry, no, not you, not you, not you, not you. I just wanted him, you know. So he had to say his name. Otherwise, they would all come out if God called them out, right?
That was a stanza he thought about that. I never gave that a thought in my life, but that's interesting. Interesting.
Okay. So here's a normal or classical depiction of what it might have looked like with Jesus calling. I don't know if he had to do the force thing with his hands or not. He might have just spoken it. We don't know, but that's a normal painting look. And then here's another one. And the dead man came out, and his hands and feet were bound in grave clothes, and his face wrapped in a headcloth, so he looks kind of like a mummy there. But since Donna's back with us, we have these two. Possibly, Lazarus come out. Mom, I don't want to go to school. In that moment, Jesus raised him from the grave. Lazarus was more than a little foggy about what was going on because, he's been dead for 4 days. Maybe. I don't know. I could really use a tic tac. That one's probably applicable. He probably would have had some bad halitosis after being in there for 4 days.
What was really interesting is when you looked at tremendous number of slides on this on the internet, not pictures, was that apparently some people that make these do not know their Bible very well. They have all kind of mistakes.
Yes.
All kinds of things that just are wrong. There was one where actually Jesus and Martha and Mary went into the cave, and he's lying there in a coffin and sitting up in the coffin, but doesn't have any bandages or anything on. I mean, there's just some shots, and then some of them he's coming out and has nothing on, no bandages on or anything. And she just wondered how much they really knew the text when they did that. And then other times there would be some really, really good shots.
Well, I'm so glad you said that, because if you don't think there's some humor in the Bible, I would love to convince you otherwise, because here's one. Jesus said, unwrap him and let him go. You've got this guy who's alive, who's wrapped all the way up head and feet, if he is like a mummy, and you can almost hear the, and it's like, okay, unwrap him, let him go. He's back now, and you're being mean to the guy. He could trip, he could fall down. Set him free. I've done the hard part. Is what Jesus is saying. Let him return to normal animation. 6 days before the Passover celebration began, Jesus arrived in Bethany, the home of Lazarus, the man he had raised from the dead. So just to make sure that we are clear on who we're talking about. A dinner was prepared in Jesus' honor. Martha served, and Lazarus was among those who ate with him. And then Mary took 12-ounce jar of expensive perfume made from the essence of nard, and she anointed Jesus' feet with it, wiping his feet with her hair. The house was filled with fragrance.
Yeah, like I say, there are several Marys. There's Jesus. In a couple of occasions, actually, they come to Jesus and cry on him and do that. And so this is not Mary Magdalene, as you get all kind of guesses, a Mary Magdalene or some other Mary, but this one we know very clearly from the context and the fact that it's Martha and Lazarus and Mary all mentioned in this particular story. But she's going to prepare him for his death. Yeah,
and interestingly enough, she may be the only person that it's really sunk into, because here's the anointing. And in this story, as Dr. Cloud has said, make sure when you're reading through different stories, especially if something that sounds very similar to this one, you notice that in one of them, Lazarus and Mary and Martha are not there. And also, there's not the text about Judas getting upset about the waste of how much money this ointment would be. All of that's in this one. So they're two different occurrences. But here, she anoints him, and then Judas Iscariot, the disciple who would soon betray him, said that perfume was worth a year's wages. It should have been sold and the money given to the poor. And then that's where the famous statement from Jesus comes, not that he cared for the poor, he was a thief, and not that he was in charge of the disciples' money. He often stole some for himself. That's not what I meant. What Jesus says is, you'll always have the poor with you. You won't always have me with you, which is here. Sorry, I was a slide ahead. Jesus replied, leave her alone. She did this in preparation for my burial. Now, he's told them he's going to die and raise in 3 days. and they're still walking around acting like they don't know what that means. But Mary, who sat at his feet and listened, has comprehended it.
Yeah, she's picked that up.
And she's prepared his body for what she knows is actually going to happen. And that is very interesting because the others around him don't do that.
Right.
When all the people heard of Jesus' arrival, they flocked to see him and also to see Lazarus. You got to come see the guy who's been dead for 4 days and is now back. The man Jesus had raised from the dead. Then the leading priest decided to kill Lazarus too, or also for those who haven't been to English class in a while, too, or also. So also, for it was because of him that many of the people had deserted them and believed in Jesus. So exactly what Jesus said would happen has happened.
Right.
And the Pharisees are upset about it enough that the poor guy who had died for 4 days the first time has got to die again, and they need to kill Jesus too because this is just too problematic. Too many people are believing in him.
Yeah, this walking around talking to people, telling what's happened, this is too much. So we need to get rid of the evidence. They didn't kill Lazarus, but that was part of their plan.
Let's do this since we have that clock's fast by 1 minute. We have 3 minutes left.
Okay.
You don't have to agree with me, and you don't have to argue with me either. I think what's fascinating is in all the parables that Jesus tells, he never uses anybody's name except in the rich man and Lazarus.
Abraham and Lazarus, yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, yes, Abraham's
Right.
there, but the character in the parable, we don't know who the rich man is. He doesn't use his name. We don't know who any of the other people are, the Good Samaritan, they don't use names, whatever. But you have this one parable where they use Lazarus' name. The only problem that has been hard for me to figure out chronology-wise or filling in the data is, that story does talk about Lazarus was laying at the gate and that he was a beggar. And I don't know how that would, I don't know exactly what to do with that. But it is fascinating that he says you always have the poor with you. Like maybe Lazarus is not well off. Maybe he is the poor Jesus is mentioning. I don't know. But besides that point that I can't really do anything with, Lazarus goes somewhere for 4 days because he's dead. And it's interesting that what gets said in that parable is the rich man realizes, well, let me send somebody back to tell my brothers so that they don't end up in the same fate I'm in. And then it says, which is applicable obviously to Jesus, even if someone returned from the dead, they wouldn't believe. And we all go, oh, he's talking about when Jesus resurrects. Lazarus came back before Jesus did. And they don't believe, they want to kill him. And they want to kill Jesus. So, yeah, I think it's the same Lazarus. I just don't know about the begging at the gate part.
Sure. And if it isn't, you got a great parallel there about people would believe.
Right.
Here Lazarus comes back from the dead, and people didn't believe. And then
Right.
they were afraid other people were going to believe it, and so let's kill him.
Let's kill it.
Get rid of the evidence.
Exactly. So, hope you've enjoyed this series of lessons. We sure have. And now we're looking forward to going to Biblical Words series. We shortened that on here. In the online class information and in whatever's printed around here in different places at the building, it says something like biblical words, their origin and their meaning. We're going to look at words that oftentimes we don't realize how rich and how much depth they actually have. And that will involve some language, but you don't have to know Hebrew, you don't have to know Greek. We're just going to unpack some things that sometimes are hidden from us in English, especially words that we unfortunately, it's interesting. Some of the original languages have a smaller vocabulary. Hebrew literally has like 3,000 words or 6,000 words that are actually unique. And the English language has many more than that, like 4 times that much. But because of that, we have 4 or 5 words we can choose in English that the Hebrew words only have 1 for. And so sometimes when we choose one of the English words, we choose one that leads people down a certain path of understanding. And if we had chosen one of the other ones, they would have gone a different way. And so we're going to try to discuss some of that and bring some depth to your Bible study.
And like in the sermon today, I used the word for workmanship. I used the word poem because our word poem comes from that exact same word there. And then I love the way the New Living Translation, we're God's masterpiece. God takes your life, and if you give it to him, give it to Jesus, and writes a beautiful poem with your life. It's a beautiful idea. So there's some texts that just come alive when you see that, like the waiting father running across the fields and kissed him and kissed him and kissed him. And the same word is used when Jesus is betrayed by Judas. Judas tells the soldiers, not just whom I kiss or whom I greet, because somebody else might have stepped out and been greeted, but he says, the one that I kiss a lot, kataphaleo, uses the same word, the one that I show a lot of affection to you. That's the one, because it's in the dark, And so Jesus said, do you betray the Son of Man with a sign of affection, with a kiss? So there's a play on words there.
Looking forward to it. Hope you are. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for today. Thank you for Rodney and how you've made him and the impact he has been on so many people's lives, including mine. Thank you for, in this series that we've been doing this year as you go, we got to look at how Rodney has gone and just the years, the 88 years that he's been here and all the people that he's influenced and the way you've changed him and how you worked through his life and how you've worked through him and others' lives. Thank you for David being here this morning and for Daniel and for all of those that Rodney is such a big part of their life. And may, as he challenged us this morning, may we leave here and go find someone that has been instrumental in our lives and thank them, especially if they don't know that they have been. And most of all, we thank you for that. We thank you for Jesus. Jesus, we thank you for even when we were yet your enemy, you died for us. And as we have come to the realization of just what you have done for us and the instrumental gift of grace that you are, may it continue to be more and more evident to us and more clearly understood by each of us so that the poems that you're writing in each of our lives can be completed by the time you call us home. Be with us as we go out now into the world and represent you to all those that you send to us and you send us to. And may we always remember that we're representing the King and we are ambassadors of the King. Empower us to do so and do it well in your name. Through the power of your Holy Spirit, we pray.